Like a lot of journalists turned media entrepreneurs, Eric Newcomer decided to launch a paid newsletter after leaving his job at Bloomberg in 2020. That model yielded 2,500 subscribers who collectively pay over $400,000 a year to access his newsletter about startups. But that's no longer the biggest part of his business. Today, Eric generates over $1.5 million a year from the Cerebral Valley AI Summit, a twice-a-year conference that he monetizes through a mixture of ticket sales and premium sponsorships. In a recent interview, he explained the conference's origin story, how he attracts the right mix of startup founders and VC investors, and why he thinks he can replicate its format across multiple tech industry niches. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, have you ever wondered how I monetize this show? It's entirely reliant on subscriptions to my Substack newsletter. When you subscribe, you're able to book a half-hour introductory phone call with me. You also receive subscriber-only interviews with some of the world's most successful media entrepreneurs. Support the work I do here by subscribing at simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. And finally, if you're on the lookout for interviews with the world's most successful media entrepreneurs about how they built their businesses, then this is the show for you. So take a few moments to hit the subscribe button down below. Okay, let's jump into the interview. Hey, Eric, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Excited to talk.
So I've had you on the podcast before about like a little over around like 2 years ago, and on that we kind of talked about your origin story, how you started out as a journalist working for places like Bloomberg and The Information, and how you launched this newsletter called Newcomer, and how you had built the business up until then. You've significantly evolved and grown since then, and that's what we want to talk about today. But just to get people kind of caught up to speed with the basics, when did you launch Newcomer?
Yeah. So, I was the first employee at The Information. I was at Bloomberg for 6 years covering startups and venture capital, particularly Uber. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, I quit it all to start Newcomer, which was, startups and venture capital tech Substack with my last name that works very well for covering startups, Newcomer. And so, yeah, that's when I got my
Oh,
start.
I didn't even really think of that as a great it's a great play on words there. So
Yeah,
as you said, you were on Substack. You still are on Substack even today, and you
correct.
said that like you covered like venture capital. So that's kind of like your bread and butter. You're covering what like funding rounds, what's going on internally within these venture capital firms, what they're investing in, stuff like that.
Totally. Yeah. It's a lot, it's a real mix of types of pieces. Some of our most successful pieces are like the financial details of investment firms and how they're performing. I did a bear case on OpenAI last week. We sort of, have a regular Friday post catching everybody up on what's going on in startups and venture capital. And so it's a mix of reporting, columns, and I've hired a reporter in January, Madeline Renbarger from Business Insider, trying to hire somebody else. So starting to become more of a newsroom.
Yeah, and like it's sometimes you get scoots, but it's also evergreen content, and then you also have like what looks like a database product that we'll talk about, but it's not just breaking news. It's more kind of like analytical, kind of more holistic type of approach, right?
Totally. Though I'm very rooted in the now. I feel like we can talk about the VC directory, which is our more static piece, but most of even the analytical stuff we're doing is very, why do you care about it today, this week, what's happening in the news, and not written necessarily with an eye that it works, a month from now.
Yeah. And when we talked last, I would say, would it be accurate to say for the first like year or two that you were primarily funded through subscriptions?
Yeah, first 2 years I was I was a Substacker. And then I hired a business guy as a chief of staff, and honestly, I think we thought we were going to be optimizing subscription revenue. So it was basically, I think it was entirely subscriptions for the first 2 years. I don't even know if I even sold like a sponsor
Yeah,
then.
and so I don't know what it was originally priced, but right now it's priced at around $200.
Yeah, it's $199 a year. I think I launched at 150 with a discount for the first year, and then we raised prices along the way.
Yeah, and then you have the orange check mark on Substack, which indicates that you're over 1,000 subscribers. So somewhere north of $200,000 in revenue in just subscriptions alone.
Yeah. So, I, I recently said on stage at a conference, I have between 400,000 and $500,000 in subscription revenue with about 2,500 paid subscribers. And when we talk about events, I can talk about that
So
number.
that would be an amazing accomplishment in and of itself. But a few months after I interviewed you, I saw a headline in Axios that you had surpassed $1 million in annual revenue, and of course, everybody's ears perk up whenever, especially like
Right.
a solo content creator, hits that seven-figure mark. So let's talk about like what got you there and how you've diversified your business. You said that you hired a business manager or like kind of a chief of staff or something like that. So talk me through that decision. When did you hire this person, and like what was your thinking about about
Yeah, it was about 2 years ago. His name's Riley Kinsella. I mean, he really, I put out a chief of staff job posting, and he was sort of far and away the best candidate. I mean, he wrote like an essay for why he wanted to join. He really understood the newsletter opportunity and like Newcomer's sort of brand reach. I mean, we laugh. I think that he wrote out like, "Oh, here's our plan for growing revenue in the first year." I don't think that plan was really what got us to where we are, but he and I sort of together um sort of have found this events business, and that has really been the big lever for
Yeah,
growth.
and so, but like, what was your motivation? Because, like I said, you were successful with subscriptions. Probably, if you had just stayed a one man operation, you'd be making several $100,000 a year just in subscriptions, which is a pretty good living. What did you think there was like an opportunity you weren't capitalizing on, and you just needed someone to focus on that kind of full time?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just think there's a lot of opportunity for growth. I'd like to build sort of more of a newsroom covering startups and venture capital. In some ways, during the pandemic, it was easy to go work by yourself because we were all isolated anyway. And I think coming out of the pandemic, you start to want a team again. And so, now I had the confidence that I could run something and, needed to build a big enough sort of revenue stream to justify starting to hire a newsroom. And then, I just think I cover all these startups and businesses, and it's like, oh, I have a chip on my shoulder. I can prove that I can build a business. So yeah, I just wanted to keep pushing things forward.
So you said that when you hired him, the initial idea was maybe he could help you with like improve your subscription funnel and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so how did that original assumption start to evolve into actually you need to focus on an event?
Totally serendipitously. Basically, the true story is I was going to my bachelor party in California. I'm based in New York. So it was like, oh, I should expense the flights. Like, what's some business we can do while I'm in San Francisco? And my friends who run this company, Volley, had their employees work from home on Thursdays. And they're in Hayes Valley, which is what Cerebral Valley was, this sort of AI hub, the generative AI hub. So we are like, let's see if we can put together an event. And basically, I texted people, and within like 30 or 40 minutes, I had a top partner at Benchmark, Kleiner Perkins. I had the CEO of Stability AI on board to speak. We ultimately had the CEO of Databricks, the co-founder of Anthropic, one of the OpenAI board members, and Adam D'Angelo, the CEO of Quora. So just a ton of people, Hugging Face CEO. So that was like a super legit event in an open office. We made a bunch of money on it. We had,
So okay, just so back up so I understand. So
yeah,
like
sorry.
so it's not like you had to get a venue or anything like that. You literally had buddies who had
Right.
free office
Yeah,
space, and
yeah,
you're
yeah.
like,
I mean, like
let's
there's
get people into a room and have some.
yeah, let's see. I was like shushing people, it wasn't ideal, but I think people liked it because it was like, wow, we're all right here. It just had a very like grassroots sort of like garage band feel that you can never recreate because even if I want to do that intentionally, now it's like, oh, you guys are pros, you can't just like throw everybody in. But it was a lot of fun, sort of chaotic energy. Yeah, we had the CEO of Databricks at our speaker dinner, met Naveen Rao, the CEO of Mosaic ML, and that turned into a $1.4 billion deal. And Business Insider and Fortune have written about that. So that gave us like a ton of credibility. We had this like super legit event from the start, and then we had this huge deal. And so we did another event, another Cerebral Valley AI Summit in November at SF Jazz. Then we just did one in June in New York, and we're ramping up for our fourth Cerebral Valley in 2 years in San Francisco on November
And
20th.
what year was that first kind of more informal event?
2023, that was last
And
year.
did you monetize that from the very beginning?
Yeah. I think that event we had Samsung and Oracle as sponsors, and we're charging for
What
tickets.
was the time between when you're like, I'm flying to this city and I want to expense this these plane tickets?
6 weeks. We did the whole thing in 6 weeks. That was the other like, I mean, it's very startup, it's like people are like, sure, yeah, let's do it. Man, now, when you're 6 weeks out, I'm like worried. I'm like, we need to like get all these speakers lined up. But then, yeah, we were doing the whole thing sort of just rolling towards the deadline, which was a lot of fun.
And did you charge for tickets from that first time?
Yeah. I forget. It might have been like, I don't know. I can't remember, 800 or something at the time. We charge 1,600 for VCs and like 150 for founders. So we like really want founders there, and we give them a much better deal. That time we weren't savvy yet, so we charge like the same price for
And
everybody.
you, for that first one, you just put a like mention in your newsletter or something like that, and it just sent them to a landing page where they could buy tickets.
Yeah. I mean, the newsletter is like the marketing engine. I mean, I do think like the core realization that I'm sure many people have had is that like subscription revenue is nice, but actually like what you have is this sort of, now I have 100,000 free readers. You have this very sort of attuned audience who trusts you. And so, yeah, you can draw attention to your events. And, I, not every subscriber who applies goes. I don't think we're rejecting a lot of subscribers. It's, sort of, it's an invite only event by application. But we've surveyed readers and they're totally chill with us like promoting the event. And so it's been very synergistic.
And so, like, why do you have it so that people have to apply to come?
I mean, the whole value of the conference really is like the quality of the people who are there. So we're doing a lot of gatekeeping. And I mean, the event is really first and foremost for AI startup founders and then for investors. And so, if you're a exec at like some tech company or like, an engineer, we want some sign that you're about to start a company. We're doing a lot of work asking VCs, who's secretly raised a series A that we should be inviting. And so we want, high quality founders so that they're meeting each other and that, the investors there are finding important future investable companies. And, we really want it to be sort of a deal making, networking place. And so audience quality is just as important as like the speaker quality. And that's something we're always trying to get better at, sort of signaling to people who are applying that like you're really coming to this to sort of meet a bunch of people who are really valuable to you in the same place.
And what's the reasoning behind charging so much less for founders? Is it that they're the main draw that like
Yeah,
draws
they're
the
they're the
people?
cool
Yeah.
kids. They make the whole thing work. I mean, we monetize them by the sponsors want to spend time with them, and like also it's just they're not as flush yet, so it just makes sense in every direction. I mean, I'm really proud in what we built for a lot of reasons, but one is we're competing against events that investment firms put on where everything's free. I've been to Kotu's conference. They pay for your hotels. So definitely it's a hard. It's nice to be able to make money off an event when you're competing against free events. But I think the value we bring is real neutrality, like a good sense of the story. We work really hard on the events, and so yeah, it's been fun.
And so let's talk about like what both sides get out of it. So what do the founders get out of it by going?
They get a good sense of like what the big themes are, what's on everybody's mind. They get to see other founders that they might partner with. Um, Media is there. They get to see a bunch of investors at once that they might raise from. So yeah, I think, I mean, we're really trying to be at, like, this is where AI is happening. It's like the themes of the events will be stuff like, you know, open source becoming foundation models becoming competitive with ChatGPT, or the investor focus on applications. And so you'll just really get a sense of like what the vibes are ahead of, what you're seeing in like funding announcements. And you'll hear from companies that are buzzy before they raise, a several $100 million series C. I mean, yeah, I think Poolside, Jason Warner, the CTO of GitHub, spoke at one of our events, and he just raised like $500 million. So you're just sort of getting a sense of what's coming up the pike and what what the vibes are, and you're meeting sort of a bunch of key people in the industry in one place on one day. And we put them in San Francisco, New York, because we're really trying to attract people who are hard at work. So we're not like making you like fly out to some event where we're going to trap you. It's like, come, and this is going to be super efficient, one day out of many days working super hard.
And for the VCs, obviously, there's the educational aspect of that for them. But are they also going that with the motivation of meeting founders they can invest in?
Definitely, yeah. Right. I mean, the best VCs want to go places where founders are, and so that's an easy pitch. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So this chief of staff, what is his role in helping you with the events?
Yeah, so I promoted him to business lead. He's managing most of the sponsor relationships at this point, sourcing a lot of them, and then he's making sure tickets get sold. He's dealing with the logistics of tickets. Honestly, like, we both got Athena EAs. I didn't like having one, honestly, but he's working with an EA now, so he's really dealing with he's very aware of like who's applied, who are we letting in, and running stuff by me, whereas I'm more involved uh with the speakers and the sort of content, and then sort of the big decisions. And then I also want to say, we host Cerebral Valley with Volley, my friends who had that office, Max Child and James Wilsterman. And so they're moderating some of the panels. I'm like, they're figuring out like some of the speakers with our input for the panels, and yeah, are helpful in like design and a bunch of other stuff. So we do it collaboratively with them.
And it's still a one-day summit.
Yes.
And so, like, in terms of the programming, it sounds like it's mainly panel based. You're trying to just like, you're picking a topic, you're finding who are the best people to speak on this, and then like a journalist like you or your new reporter that's working for you, they're sitting down as like as the journalist who's interviewing them for the crowd,
Yeah. I do. I'm probably going to do like 4. We have Dario, the CEO of Anthropic. I think I'm interviewing Alexander Wang, the CEO of Scale, Martin Casado at Andreessen Horowitz. And then, yeah, Madeline is going to do a bio panel at the next Cerebral Valley. I think Max is doing one on voice AI. James is doing one on robotics. And then we have Deirdre Bosa at CNBC, I think, is going to interview Ali Goatsy at Databricks. So we bring in, I think we've had Alex Conrad, Casey Newton, some, top tech reporters come in, and friends sort of moderate panels. So we do a mix. We've had VCs moderate panels, but I've been disappointed. We have ones we trust now that we put as moderators, but mostly, yeah, we stick to journalists.
Last time we spoke, you had a podcast, but it seemed like it didn't. There was no direct, revenue and stuff like that.
Podcast is the weak link of the Newcomer media empire. Yeah.
But it seems like I was looking at your YouTube channel now, and it looks like you're putting in like decent production quality to record these panels, and so it seems like it's now it's like just content that's coming out of the like free. You're creating free content that's coming out of these conferences and putting that out almost as like a podcast or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, so my podcast history. We had Dead Cat, which was Tom Dotan, who is a Business Insider and good friend, and sometimes Katie Benner, who is at the New York Times, still is at the New York Times. We did like a tech media show that I think was a lot of fun, and had like a core like media PR sort of people who care about the story of tech. But then Tom went to the Wall Street Journal, so they wouldn't let him like do something on the side. So that sort of killed that show. Then I did a VC sort of interview podcast. I've done some like Cerebral Valley themed episodes. And now actually we've just relaunched the podcast with Madeline and I doing sort of a tight 20-minute show on Tuesdays saying like what's happened, sort of like catching you up on the news and talking about a key issue. So I'm excited about that. We're working with the founding producer of TechCrunch's podcast. Anyway, but yeah, and then we're also publishing videos from Cerebral Valley that we have sort of super high quality recording. I think we need to be much better at like creating TikToks. I feel like I haven't found I don't have like a lot of bandwidth or interest in sort of the social clips aspect, but we need to figure out, we have a great problem of having like more good content than we know what to do with yet. And I'm not a YouTuber, I'm a newsletter person. So yeah, I think we have strong video from those events that we need to get more meat off the bone.
And so how do you think about the video that comes out of that event, like its role in your media business? Like, is it purely to create FOMO for the next event, to drive tickets for the next event, or how are you thinking around that?
Yeah, it's FOMO, and you want the speakers to feel, I think, these are on the record talks. And so I think part of the pitch to speakers is that the audience and the crowd is super valuable, but this is really having a much further reach. At Cerebral Valley, New York, Fortune interviewed Marco Argenti, the CIO of Goldman. So that became a big story for them. So we have reporters there. We're putting out videos. We cover it in the newsletter. So, in some ways, it's similar to how Kara Swisher thought about code, which is, this is an elite event, but the things you say here reach a much larger audience. And our YouTube videos from the event are, a small component of that strategy.
Mm-hmm. So when you look at like a big conference, like there are so many different ways you can slice and dice sponsorships. You got the big title sponsor, but you got the sponsors on the lanyards and the programming, and then you have individual panel sponsors, and then you have this whole sponsors booths, like the whole sponsors room. How do you approach sponsorships for a one-day summit?
Yeah, so I mean, our top sponsors, are getting placement sort of in the backdrop of the event, mentioned in all the videos, very visible at the event. HP and Oracle have been very consistent top sponsors for us. We co-host the VIP dinners, usually with a venture firm. In the past, that's been Greylock. For this one, it's gonna be Kleiner Perkins. We also did a fintech conference that I haven't mentioned that Bain Capital Ventures sponsored the VIP dinner for. We're not doing like booths, it's more like sponsor the coffee mugs, sponsor like, the exclusive like speaker room, the cocktail hour. So we try and keep it sort of pretty premium and not too thirsty looking.
And is their goal just like to raise awareness that they have AI stuff too? Like they're not trying to recruit startups or startup founders or anything like that?
I think some of them, like Twilio was a sponsor, and I think they wanted people to do their developer program. So it's a range. I mean, Oracle is selling, cloud services with NVIDIA to a lot of these AI startups. So they have a very clear like customer
Okay,
acquisition.
yeah. So they're trying to sell
You know,
services to these founders and VCs and stuff
yeah.
like that.
And, I think the core message, and this is something we want to be true for sponsors across our events, is, solidify yourself as like a top player in AI. Like this is the legit AI event for true insiders who really get it and know. And so if you're sponsoring this event, it's like, it's as strong a signal as you can have that you're really putting your money where your mouth is and that you're dedicated to everything that's going on in generative AI. So there are venture firms that want to make that clear. There are big corporates that want to make that clear. And so, yeah, we've had a lot of excitement from sponsors.
So you mentioned that there was a fintech conference. So is this the goal now to like pick different niches within tech and start trying to do one day events around for each of them?
Yeah. Yeah. I think like 200 to 400 person events with a preview dinner and a VIP dinner in a couple verticals is going to be the strategy for next year.
So like is fintech the only other one you've done so far?
Yeah, so that one was actually like tied to the Silicon Valley bank crisis. It was 1 year after the anniversary, which is very journalist thing to do, to sort of have a negative oriented event. We got, the SVB president and JP Morgan and Stifel and a bunch of the banks. Yeah, and we had sort of anchor sponsor and Bain. And it was an interesting experiment. It was profitable, but it wasn't like, sort of the moneymaker that Cerebral Valley is. I think to make it sort of more effective going forward, we want to pivot it from sort of a banking focused event with a lot of banking as a service startups to a more like fintech oriented event. But yeah, we think it has the makings of something exciting.
So let's go back to talking about the newsletter. So we briefly talked about this like database thing that you're doing. So I've interviewed more and more media entrepreneurs who are doing these database products. You're the first one who built it within Substack, and it's kind of janky the way that you've done it, where you've created a bunch of
Yeah.
articles and then
Yeah. Give me
yeah, so
advice.
like a lot of the other ones I've interviewed, they've actually used some kind of separate platform, and even when they're on Substack, they're sending people to that separate platform. It's
Do they make a lot of money off of
well,
them, or
they certainly
what's?
can charge more than what they charge, or they try to charge more than what they're charging for their
Would they
the event.
set a separate paywall
Yeah,
for
so
them?
it's like a much more expensive subscription than their standard like newsletter subscription. So what you did is basically, I think you've created an article page for every single major VC firm, and then you created a directory that links to all those article pages, and then each article page has a certain amount of information about the VC firm, but is then it has like a paywall that kicks in, and then if you and all the additional information is behind that paywall. Is that kind of a accurate?
The key way that people are, and I'm open to this, is like not the optimal version, so happy to laugh about it. But like the key way people are consuming it is that in our Friday piece, often one element will be a VC directory entry. So subscribers are getting an email with the latest one that is usually tied to them raising a fund, them doing a big deal. So they're sort of in the news. Then we take those and put them in sort of like a big updated directory. Yeah, so that's sort of my defense of like, most of what you're getting is like, I think that way, and then we just like aggregate them. I agree that the aggregation is not the most like navigable thing. Substack doesn't seem really set up for it. Substack doesn't have great SEO around it, and so I don't think we're getting sort of everything we could out of it at the moment. And I think they're very valuable. But right now we're like a 3-person company. And so the strategy is like lean into what is working, and events are, crushing it. And so we've had to prioritize, but I think, well, we'll hire a couple more people over the next few months, and maybe that, we have this asset and all this information that we're not making the most out of. But are you seeing people succeed with these like static database? Like, are they doing it for like SEO, or are they doing it I'm not convinced I'm going to get like a pro tier paywall for our VC
I mean,
directory.
I guess like everybody's trying to be the Bloomberg of a specific niche,
Right.
and then that's kind of the move. So like I'm sure you're familiar with Freight Waves is doing this for kind of
Hmm.
the logistics industry, and then there's like lots of nichified ones. I mean, I don't have insights into their specific balance
Right.
books, but it seems like a lot of different companies, or the information has its creator economy.
Yeah, well, the information, I think it's working. I mean, they have a pro version that has a lot of really useful information. Um, so I could see it working at some point, but I think we need to sort of be a little further along before it would be super
So my
viable
next
for
question
us.
was is how do you do the data entry to like maintain those? But it sounds like there's some kind of item that goes out in your Friday newsletter where it's just like you're already curating this information, and it's
Right.
just a matter of copying and pasting that into
Exactly.
some kind of evergreen article page so people
Right.
can access all that information.
Right.
So
So
what is
so
that information that's then locked behind the paywall? What is it, like money they're raising or something like that?
so Madeline, on Fridays writes a newsletter. It usually has like an opening sort of news item essay about sort of the top thing going on in Surface and Venture Capital. And then sometimes we'll do the VC directory. That will usually be behind the paywall. So it's already, that whole entry is paywalled. And then we take the full entry and put it in a larger paywalled piece. So it's just like a subscriber only perk. Maybe some of them were putting the paywall in the middle of them, but fundamentally, like, they're meant to be sort of a subscriber
What
perk.
about like the opening free paragraphs and all those evergreen articles? Did you just have your reporter just go by and make all those landing pages, or how much do you think strategically around that?
Yeah, I mean, she's writing the whole
Yeah.
entries. Yeah.
Okay. And then, like, how are you driving people to those evergreen landing pages? Like, are you all like anytime like
This is
any?
not a core part of
Okay.
our
Okay.
strategy.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
I just feel like the newcomer strategy, the overall, we're doing our 4-year anniversary uh next week, and we've hit we're going to hit more than $2 million in revenue this year, and like 75% of it is the events, and like the newsletter is a stable revenue stream between 400 and $500,000, but it is fun. But we have 100,000 subscribers, and it's fundamentally like a marketing engine. So I get that, like, in some ways, to me it's like a compliment that like there are a lot of businesses that spend a lot of time on like the VC directory, but really it's just like a small part of our editorial offering that we've like put together, but it's not like one of the major
Okay.
drivers of our
One last
business.
question about that, and then we'll move on. So, like, when you if you mention Andreessen Horowitz or anything like that in the newsletter, do you have like a policy where you're always going to then include a link to the landing page, or you're not
No.
even thinking about that? Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes we
Yeah.
link to it, but
Okay.
like, no.
So
Yeah.
for the newsletter, what's your sponsorship strategy with the newsletter now?
Chaotic. We bundle some sponsorships with the event. When we're selling the event sponsorship, we sell some newsletter and podcast sponsorships with it. We've been running more sponsorships, but we're about to put out a job posting to hire our first dedicated salesperson, and so that will be a big priority for them. We're certainly leaving a lot of money on the
Yeah. So
table
you think
there.
that's like a major untapped opportunity? And
Yeah.
that's like something that's just sold at like a set rate that's based on the idea. It's not volume of eyeballs, but like this is like an
Right.
influential
No,
eyeball.
we need people who get it. Like, you're subscribing to Newcomer because, or you're advertising Newcomer because like the GPs of most of the top venture firms are reading it. Like many of the top founders in Silicon Valley are reading it. And so you want to be, it's sort of how, I mean, Semaphore is much savvier at positioning these things than I am, but it's how they talk about it, which is you want to reach like particular people in like media, the leaders of an industry. They're more focused on like Washington, but if you want to reach those people in Silicon Valley, you're coming to Newcomer, not because you want to reach like every tech aspirant person in the world, but because you're trying to reach the decision makers. And there's some advertisers that absolutely get that story, and some who are like trying to look at CPMs, and if you're trying to think about CPMs, you're never going to make sense for us.
And like so, then with hiring this person, like the idea is that they're going to be able to sell like six-figure ad packages that go for like 12 months or something like that.
Yeah. Or, well, no, better rates than that, I
Oh,
think.
really?
I
Even better
mean,
rates than that? Yeah.
I sold 6 podcast ads for like
Wow, that
$100,000.
is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
um,
But so we would prefer to be like discerning and not run ads if they're not like, the price we think it
Yeah.
merits.
So for the events, it's going to be, is it mainly just going to be the two coasts, New York and San Francisco, or do you see other locales as a potential for hosting?
Uh, I like that our events are like where the majority of people who are going to attend the events are. It certainly makes it sort of low lift, and I think it fits this idea that uh, they're hard at work, and we don't want to like rip them away from that. Uh, I think I dream of having this sort of retreat multi-day event someday. I don't think it's going to be a priority next year. So I think the only reason next year we would have an event outside of New York and San Francisco is, if it felt like there was like a more iconic thematic city. I don't think we're going to do like a Hollywood tech oriented event, but if we did, we'd do it in LA. And maybe if we did a gaming event, which is more possible, we do that in LA. But I love San Francisco, and so that's always going to be our default location.
So what are your ambitions over the next like 2 or 3 years? Like you said that you don't want this to be a solo operation. You want this to be, a real media company. I mean, not to say that it isn't currently, but you
No,
want it to be,
yeah,
you want it to scale. So what,
yeah.
when you're thinking about investing your money in growth, where do you want to put those investments?
We'd like to double revenue next year. I think the path to doing that is to having like 4 anchor events that do as well as our like best Cerebral Valley event. I think we need to hire a reporter or reporters who could truly MC those events besides me, and be sort of play the booker and MC role for those events. I think that there's you could really I think I could, cover startups and venture capital pretty comprehensively with a team of, 8 great reporters. So I think like the end state size of Newcomer to me is like a newsroom of like 8 reporters and like, 2 editors, uh, doing really well, like a really strong media business around that. And then, like some of the business, then we start saying, I don't think the VC directory is like the best representation of the data play we would make, but then, have some data strategy or like research strategy piece of it. I mean, that is not like stuff we're going to achieve next year, but I think that's sort of how I sort of see the business evolving over a couple
And
years.
then like for these reporters, would they be beat reporters? Like you'd have like a green tech reporter, an AI reporter, fintech reporter, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I want them very focused on like the money of these businesses and like where investment is going and how investors think about all these categories. But yeah, beat reporters. I think one really open question, honestly, is the writing style. I think part of what's differentiated me is that I write in first person. I give my perspective. I bring sort of the history and context that I have to my coverage area, and like I'm sort of open where I think things are up for debate and where I think, I believe certain things. And I think the audience like really responds to that. And so I want to figure out how to bring in reporters who are like really good at like talking to sources, but have a little bit of confidence to sort of call it as they see it. But we need to do that in a way that people understand who whose voice are they hearing from? Is this the voice of a publication, or is this a voice of sort of a number of individuals? And I think that's something that's going to have to play
Yeah, I
out.
guess that was my next question about like talent. Like you got publications like Puck where the talent kind of takes front stage, where they're bringing in like super veteran type of journalists, and they're kind of like a personal brand, like Matt Bellany or Dylan Byers and stuff like that, versus another publication where the publication's brand takes center stage, and they might even be more willing to have more junior level reporters and stuff. What are you thinking about that in terms of talent? Whether you want someone who brings their own brand to the table, or if someone who's just someone you can train and like can grow just the more generic kind of Newcomer brand. Or
Generic.
not?
No.
I mean, no, like in terms of talent. Like, do you want to?
No, I know. Newcomer is always going to be about Silicon Valley and like startups and venture capital. So Puck, I really respect them, but it's a little chaotic in that they're building all these like, it's like each newsletter has its own strong brand. I'm like, each one of those could be sort of a publication. And so I think what I'm saying is, yeah, I could be like a Puck vertical, but like instead of saying, oh, I'm going to get like, a totally different style writer, it's like, no, we're going to get more of the general like pro capitalist, pro Silicon Valley, but critical and free thinking and like very rooted in like what sources are saying and giving some commentary and having some fun with it. We're going to get other people who share that ethos, and then around the margins, hopefully, if you're gonna have fun and like have spunk, like they should disagree with me sometimes and like say it in the newsletter. It doesn't need to be exactly lockstep, but fundamentally it will have a similar voice and a similar like approach to our coverage. And so yeah, I'd say overall that will be fairly in line with my style and what subscribers think I'm delivering. But a lot of what I'm trying to deliver is like unexpected sort of creative stories. And I'm sure for somebody to really do that well, they're going to have to bring their own sort of sensibility to that. And so it'll be a mix of two things.
So obviously, there's been some like really huge tech podcasts to emerge in recent years. You kind of said that you described your podcast strategy as kind of haphazard. Would
Yeah.
you want to hire like a dedicated podcast producer whose job it is to figure out like a better podcast strategy and
Well, yeah. So I sort of mentioned this. We hired Christopher Gates, who'd helped create TechCrunch's equity podcast. And so he started like, I don't know, 4 episodes ago for the current version of the Newcomer podcast. So we are, I think, finally hitting that where we have sort of a producer who's really thinking about the show. And so, yeah, I'm excited about where we're taking it. Um, but we're not doing like a launch. We're just, I'm writing posts about it. Like we're using the newsletter to distribute it. That always works pretty well for us. I'm sure guests will be the thing that, gets it to a wider audience, but we're still in the sort of, I don't know, public beta of this version of the show, but I'm co-hosting it with Madeline. I think she's doing really well. And so I think it's going to be fun, but I'm just open that it's, I'm a professional writer. I like have been on podcasts. I like talking, but I'm not like a audio person. And so I think we're still, always figuring that one out.
Are there any other aspects of your business that have launched since the last time we talked that we haven't talked about?
No, hired a reporter. We went all in on events. We're going to do the Fourth Cerebral Valley. We did the FinTech event. No, I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of what we do is still, write great stories and like those feel so varied, but then when you talk about them sort of from a business lens, it's just a bunch of stories. But I'm really proud of the coverage over the last year. I've dug into Chamath Palihapitiya when, I don't, on a very different direction when, Elon and Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz were endorsing Trump. I said people shouldn't that doesn't represent Silicon Valley and the ethos of Silicon Valley, and that they were basically top ticking this investment at the worst time for the Democrats. And so we do a real variety of stuff, some of it, very financial and some of it sort of principled. And yeah, so it's been fun.
Okay, Eric, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, it's newcomer.co. That's the newsletter. That's the hub of all things Newcomer. The Cerebral Valley AI Summit is cerebralvalleysummit.com. And I am at Eric Newcomer on Twitter. And you can always DM me, and eager to hear from everybody.
Awesome. That's a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.